In the last few years, there has been a sometimes heated discussion in certain Catholic circles about whether Muslims and Christians worship the same God. Some have outright rejected the Catholic Church's teaching about Muslims. Others haven't rejected it but find it troubling. What many people aren't aware of is just how far back in Catholic tradition the idea goes that Muslims worship God. Howdy, folks. If you like this content, you can help me out by liking, commenting, writing a review, sharing the podcast, and subscribing. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and hit the bell notification so you always get notified when I have a new video, and you can help me keep making the podcast and get early access to new episodes by going to patreon.com/Jimmy Akin Podcast. The phrase same God is fraught in that it can mean different things. Obviously, Muslims don't worship God as a trinity of persons, so they don't worship the same God in that sense. However, they do worship God as the single omnipotent creator who appeared to Abraham. Without getting into deeper philosophical waters about what counts as sameness and difference, we can talk about that in another episode. It's worth noting that Vatican II does not use the phrase same God when it talks about Muslims. Instead, it says that Muslims worship the one and merciful God and the one God. Despite the concerns expressed by some modern traditionalists, namely that this sort of language is one more example of modernism infecting the church, the recognition that Muslims worship God has not been controversial in Catholic history. Catholic tradition actually incorporates this concept. It appears that the idea that Muslims don't worship God actually comes from outside Catholicism and originates in the Protestant community. A key text in those circles is 2 Corinthians 11:4, which says that if someone comes and preaches another Jesus than the one we preached, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you submit to it readily enough. This is used to argue that a different understanding of Jesus invalidates one's faith, since one has a different Christ. This is then often backed up by appeals to Galatians 1:8, where Paul says that even if we, or an angel from heaven, should preach to you a gospel contrary to that which we preach to you, let him be accursed. Some Protestant apologists apply this chain of reasoning to us, to Catholics, and argue that we are not Christians, alleging that we have a different understanding of the gospel than they do. Fortunately, that issue can often be resolved, and we'll be talking in future episodes about what the gospel actually is and how much convergence there is between Catholics and various Protestant streams of thought. Protestant apologists also apply the same reasoning, though, to argue that Muslims worship a different God from that of Christians, since they reject the doctrine of the Trinity and thus that Jesus is the Son of God. And some in contemporary traditionalist Catholic circles have picked up on this line of thinking. There's an obvious objection, which is that non-Christian Jews also reject the Trinity, but Catholic tradition has never held that Jews don't worship God. The doctrine of the Trinity had not been clearly revealed in Old Testament times, and Jews prior to the time of Christ did not believe it. Jesus even acknowledges this, as he says in John 14, "You believe in God, believe also in me." The Trinity was new revelation with the Christian age, but that didn't stop previous Jews, or those who maintained the previous non-Trinitarian understanding of God, from genuinely directing their prayers to the Creator of the universe. This is a reflection of the fact that you don't have to know everything about someone in order to talk to him or give him honor and worship. But if non-Christian Jews disbelieve in the Trinity and nevertheless worship God, then the same will be true of Muslims who do the same thing. They may not understand God with the full Christian understanding of him, just as contemporary Jews don't, but they do recognize that there is a creator who appeared to Abraham and to whom they direct their worship. What may come as a surprise is that this has been the traditional Catholic understanding. If you read traditional authors interacting with Islam, like St. Thomas Aquinas or St. John Damascene, they definitely criticize Islam, but you don't find them saying things like Muslims worship a different God than the God we Christians worship. The more one delves into the tradition, the more clear it is that Catholics have accepted the basic premise that Muslims, despite what is flawed and incomplete in their understanding of him, nevertheless do worship God. This comes out more clearly the deeper one goes into tradition, as we can see by examining the footnotes of Vatican II's discussion of the subject. There are two passages where the Council discusses Muslims. One is in Lumen Gentium 16, and the other is in Nostra Aetate 3. The latter says, "The Church regards with esteem also the Muslims. They adore the one God, living and subsisting in himself, merciful and all-powerful, the Creator of heaven and earth, who has spoken to men. They take pains to submit wholeheartedly even to his inscrutable decrees, just as Abraham, with whom the faith of Islam takes pleasure in linking itself, submitted to God. Though they do not acknowledge Jesus as God, they revere him as a prophet. They also honor Mary, his virgin mother. At times they even call on her with devotion. In addition, they await the day of judgment, when God will render their deserts to all who have been raised up from the dead. Finally, they value the moral life and worship God especially through prayer, almsgiving, and fasting. Since in the course of centuries not a few quarrels and hostilities have arisen between Christians and Muslims, this sacred synod urges all to forget the past and to work sincerely for mutual understanding, and to preserve as well as to promote together, for the benefit of all mankind, social justice and moral welfare, as well as peace and freedom." There's a footnote towards the beginning of this passage, just after the statement that says that Muslims adore the one God, living and subsisting in himself, merciful and all-powerful, the Creator of heaven and earth. The footnote reads, compare St. Gregory VII, letter 21 to Anzir, or Nasir, king of Mauritania. Now, it's always a good idea to look up the original sources and see what they have to say. So what did Pope St. Gregory have to say? Pope St. Gregory VII reigned from 1073 to 1085, and he was one of the great reforming popes of the Middle Ages. He was a key figure in the investiture controversy and promoted the right of the Church, rather than the state, to install bishops and abbots. It was to placate Gregory that the Roman Emperor himself, Henry IV, did penance barefoot in the snow at Canossa. Gregory mandated that priests should be celibate, and for the efforts of his reign, he died in exile. He was beatified by Pope Gregory XIII in 1584, and he was canonized by Pope Benedict XIII in 1728. Unfortunately, few look up the letter that Nostra Aetate cites, and it's understandable to an extent that they don't do that. It's difficult to find the letter in English, but it is revealing about the medieval Catholic attitude towards Muslims, and it's worth reading the letter in full so that we can see the relevant statement in its full context. The letter was written to King Anazir of Mauritania, which was a Muslim-majority nation that is part of modern-day Algeria. And the letter said, Gregory, bishop, servant of the servants of God, to Anazir, king of the province of Mauritania Sitifensis in Africa, health and apostolic blessing. Your Highness sent to us within a year a request that we would ordain the priest Servandus as bishop according to the Christian order. This we have taken pains to do, as your request seemed proper and of good promise. You also sent gifts to us, released some Christian captives out of regard for St. Peter, chief of the apostles, and affection for us, and promised to release others. This good action was inspired in your heart by God, the Creator of all things, without whom we can neither do nor think anything good. He who enlightens every man that comes into the world enlightened your mind in this purpose. For Almighty God, who desires that all men shall be saved and that none shall perish, approves nothing more highly in us than this, that a man love his fellow man next to his God, and do nothing to him which he would not that others should do to himself. This affection we and you owe to each other in a more peculiar way than to people of other races, because we worship and confess the same God, though in diverse forms, and daily praise and adore him as the creator and ruler of this world. For, in the words of the apostle, he is our peace, who has made both one. This grace granted to you by God is admired and praised by many of the Roman nobility, who have learned from us of your benevolence and high qualities. Two of these, Alberic and Cencius, intimate friends of ours brought up with us from early youth at the Roman court, earnestly desiring to enjoy your friendship and to serve your interests here, are sending their messengers to you to let you know how highly they regard your prudence and high character, and how greatly they desire and are able to be of service to you. In recommending these messengers to your Highness, we beg you to show them, out of regard for us and in return for the loyalty of the men aforesaid, the same respect which we desire always to show towards you and to all who belong to you. For God knows our true regard for you to his glory, and how truly we desire your prosperity and honor, both in this life and in the life to come, and how earnestly we pray both with our lips and with our heart that God himself, after the long journey of this life, may lead you into the bosom of the most holy patriarch Abraham. This letter is very diplomatic, but also revealing. Although Gregory was firm on the clerical investiture of bishops in Christian lands, he was prepared to accept Anazir's request to have a particular priest ordained as a bishop in a non-Christian land. That's different from the European states insisting that they had the right to appoint bishops. For our purposes, though, the most important thing is that we see that one of the great reforming and saintly popes of the Middle Ages had no difficulty acknowledging to a Muslim leader that we worship and confess the same God, although in diverse or different forms, and that both Christians and Muslims daily praise and adore him as the creator and ruler of this world. It's helpful to be deep in tradition, and achieving that goal can involve checking the footnotes. If you like this content, you can help me out by liking, commenting, writing a review, sharing the podcast, and subscribing. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and hit the bell notification so you always get notified when I have a new video. And you can also help me keep making this podcast and get early access to new episodes by going to patreon.com/Jimmy Akin Podcast. Thank you, and I'll see you next time. God bless you always.